When Samuel Blackwood, a ruined furniture maker with nothing left to his name, gives his last coins to a desperate widow and her 5 starving children, he discovers a purpose beyond his grief. But as the small Missouri town whispers behind their backs and threatens what little sanctuary they found, will Samuel learn that the emptiest hands are sometimes the most capable of giving? Here are Acts 1 and 2 from The Worth of Empty Hands. A hat tumbled down Main Street, chased by the bitter November wind. Samuel Blackwood lunged for it, his fingers missing by inches as another gust sent it skittering around the corner. 3 children laughed from the safety of the general store porch. His last good hat gone, just like everything else. Another loss for old Blackwood. Someone muttered loud enough for him to hear. Samuel straightened his back, pretending not to notice the pitying glances. His stomach growled, reminding him it had been nearly a day since his last proper meal. The smell of fresh bread from Wilson's bakery made his mouth water, but the coins in his pocket wouldn't stretch that far. Not today. The clock on the town hall struck 4. Samuel's boots, once polished and fine, now scuffed and cracking at the seals, carried him away from the bustle of town toward the hillside cemetery. The path grew steeper, his breath coming in white puffs that vanished in the fading afternoon light. Dead leaves crunched beneath his feet, nature's brittle reminder that everything beautiful eventually falls. "Afternoon, Mr. Blackwood," called Elijah, the elderly gravedigger, leaning on his shovel. "Back again to visit the missus?" Samuel nodded, unable to form words around the lump in his throat. 6 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days since Mary had been laid to rest. The fever had taken her so quickly there hadn't even been time to say a proper goodbye. "Weather's turning," Elijah warned, glancing at the darkening sky. "Storm coming, sure as anything." "Won't stay long," Samuel promised, though these days he had nowhere particular to be. Elijah's eyes dropped to Samuel's thin frame. "My Martha made extra stew tonight. You'd be welcome at our table." The kindness nearly broke him. Samuel shook his head. "Thank you, but I'm fine. Really." The lie tasted bitter on his tongue. Mary's grave sat beneath the spreading branches of an oak tree. Samuel knelt beside the headstone, brushing away fallen leaves from the marble surface. His fingers traced her name, the dates carved below telling the brief story of her 42 years. "Hello, my dear," he whispered. "I've had an interesting day." Talking to her grave had become his routine, the only time he allowed his carefully constructed mask to slip. Here, with only the dead as witnesses, Samuel Blackwood could be honest about how badly he was failing. "I tried at Johnson's Mill today. They're not hiring." He sighed, watching his breath ghost away. "Neither is the livery stable or the railroad office." From his pocket, Samuel withdrew a crumpled paper. The red stamp across its face couldn't be more clear. Eviction notice. "I can't keep our room anymore. The landlord's been patient, but..." His voice cracked. "I don't know where I'll go." The furniture shop that had been in his family for 3 generations now belonged to the bank. Samuel had tried to save it after Mary fell ill, selling their house and most of their belongings to pay for doctors who, in the end, could do nothing. The debts had mounted, the customers had dwindled, and finally the bank had taken everything. "I never thought it would come to this," he admitted, running a hand through his graying hair. "Your father always said I wasn't good enough for you." Seems he was right. A fat raindrop splashed against the headstone, then another. The storm Elijah predicted was moving in fast. "I should go," Samuel said, struggling to his feet. His knees ached from the cold ground. At 46, he felt twice his age. As he turned to leave, something caught his eye. A small blue flower, somehow still blooming despite the frost that had killed everything else. Samuel carefully plucked it and placed it at the base of Mary's headstone. "Remember that picnic by Porter's Creek? All those blue flowers?" He smiled at the memory. "You made me a crown of them. Said I looked like a woodland king." Thunder rumbled in the distance. "I miss you," he whispered. "Every minute of every day." The rain began to fall in earnest as Samuel made his way back down the hill. By the time he reached Main Street, his coat was soaked through, water streaming from the brim of his old hat. The shops were closing, lanterns being extinguished one by one. Samuel paused outside his former furniture shop. Through the windows, he could see the new owner, Albert Conway, directing workers as they rearranged the display. The sign above the door no longer read, Blackwood Fine Furnishings. Now it declared Conway's Superior Furniture. Conway looked up, catching Samuel watching. His face twisted with smug satisfaction as he deliberately turned his back. The humiliation burned hotter than any fever. Conway had been trying to buy the Blackwood shop for years. Now he had it, along with all the custom furniture designs that had made the Blackwood name respected throughout the county. Samuel forced himself to walk away. No good would come from confrontation. He had more pressing concerns, like where he would sleep once the landlord locked him out tomorrow. The rain pounded harder as he trudged toward his rented room above Miller's feed store. Water seeped through his boots, his socks squishing with each step. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, the sound mournful and lonely. Samuel! Samuel Blackwood! He turned to see Reverend Phillips hurrying toward him, collar turned up against the rain, an umbrella clutched in his gloved hand. Reverend, Samuel acknowledged with a nod. Once he'd been a deacon in Phillips' church. Now he couldn't bear to attend services, to sit alone in the pew he had shared with Mary, to endure the pitying glances. I've been looking for you, Phillips said, holding the umbrella over them both. Mrs. Phillips was cleaning out the storage room at the parsonage and found these. He thrust a small bundle wrapped in brown paper into Samuel's hands. Mary's preserves, Phillips explained. She'd brought them for the harvest festival last year. Somehow they got forgotten in all the... He trailed off, uncomfortable. In all the tragedy, Samuel finished for him. Yes, well, Phillips cleared his throat. They're still good. Blackberry, I believe. Mary's preserves were always the best in the county. Samuel stared at the jars, remembering Mary in their kitchen. Hair pulled back, sleeves rolled up, the sweet smell of cooking fruit filling their home. The memory was so vivid it stole his breath. Thank you, he managed. Phillips hesitated. Samuel, I couldn't help noticing. That is, Mrs. Phillips mentioned. Are you eating regularly? The concern was genuine, but it scraped against Samuel's pride. I'm managing. The church has funds for those in need. I said I'm managing. Samuel cut him off, more sharply than intended. He softened his tone. But thank you for your concern, Reverend. Phillips looked unconvinced but didn't press. If you change your mind, our door is always open. For any kind of help. Samuel nodded, clutching the precious jars to his chest. And Samuel? Phillips added, God hasn't forgotten you, even if it feels that way. As the Reverend hurried away, Samuel stood in the rain, wondering if that was true. Lately, it seemed God had turned his face away entirely. The stairs to his room creaked under his weight. Samuel fumbled with the key, his cold fingers clumsy. Inside wasn't much warmer than outside, but at least it was dry. For one more night, at least he had shelter. The room was small, a bed, a table with one chair, a tiny stove, and a trunk containing what remained of his possessions. Samuel lit the lamp, its warm glow pushing back the gathering darkness. He placed Mary's preserves on the table, then peeled off his wet coat and hung it near the stove. From the trunk, he withdrew a quilt, the wedding quilt Mary had made from scraps of special fabrics. A piece of her mother's dress, a bit of Samuel's first suit, squares from the curtains of their first home. He wrapped it around his shoulders, allowing himself the comfort of its familiar weight. In his pocket, the eviction notice crackled. Tomorrow at noon, he would have to leave. And then what? Samuel sat at the table and carefully opened one of the jars of preserves. The sweet smell of blackberries filled the tiny room. He dipped his finger in and tasted sugar and fruit and summer sunshine. Tears sprang to his eyes. Oh, Mary, he whispered. What am I going to do without you? Outside, the storm raged on, rain battering the single window. Samuel thought of the blue flower on Mary's grave, how fragile it had looked, yet how determined to bloom despite the coming winter. He wondered if he had that kind of strength left in him. Tomorrow he would have to find out. A child's cough cut through the busy sounds of market day. Samuel nearly missed it as he counted his remaining coins, 17 cents. Not even enough for a loaf of bread and some cheese. His stomach growled a complaint, but he had grown used to ignoring its demands. Please, kind sir, just a penny for some milk. Samuel looked down to find a small girl with tangled blonde hair and eyes too old for her young face. She couldn't have been more than 6, yet she stood with a grown-up's worry in her thin shoulders. For my baby brother, she added, pointing across the square. Samuel followed her gesture to where a woman sat on an overturned crate. For more children clustered around her like chicks around a hen. The smallest, wrapped in a tattered blanket, wailed with the unmistakable cry of hunger. Where's your father, child? Samuel asked, kneeling to her level despite the protest of his aching knees. Heaven, she answered simply. Like Mama says your wife is. The words struck him like a physical blow. Samuel glanced again at the woman across the square. She was trying to comfort the crying baby while keeping an eye on the little girl who had approached him. Even from this distance, he could see the dark circles under her eyes, the careful way she held herself with dignity despite her circumstances. What's your name? He asked the girl. Emma, she replied. Emma Reed. That's my mama and my brothers and sister. Samuel looked at his 17 cents, then back at Emma Reed's hopeful face. With a sigh that wasn't really reluctance at all, he pressed the coins into her small hand. Here, get some milk for your brother. Emma's eyes widened. All of it, mister? All of it? Samuel confirmed, surprised by the lightness in his chest as he gave away his last money. God bless you, Emma exclaimed, clutching the coins tightly as she darted back toward her family. Something made Samuel follow her. Perhaps it was curiosity, or perhaps it was simply that he had nowhere else to be. As he approached, the woman looked up, her face guarded but not unfriendly. Your daughter says you've lost your husband, Samuel said by way of greeting. I'm sorry for your trouble. The woman studied him for a moment, then nodded. Thank you for helping us. Her voice was soft but clear, the kind that commanded attention without demanding it. I'm Abigail Reed. Samuel Blackwood. He tipped his hat, suddenly self-conscious of his shabby appearance. The oldest boy, who looked to be about 10, stepped slightly in front of his mother. We don't need charity, he said, though his eyes betrayed him, darting to the coins Emma still held. William, Abigail chided gently. Mind your manners. It's not charity, Samuel said. It's... He paused, searching for the right words. It's one empty hand helping another. A rumble of thunder interrupted whatever Abigail might have said in response. Dark clouds had gathered while they talked, threatening the open-air market. Looks like rain, Samuel observed unnecessarily. Do you have shelter? Abigail's hesitation told him everything. We'll manage, she said finally. The first drops began to fall, large and cold. Market-goers hurried to pack up their goods, to secure their purchases, to find cover. The Reed children huddled closer to their mother, the thin blankets they wore providing little protection. Come with me, Samuel found himself saying. There's a coffee shop just there. We can wait out the worst of it. We can't afford, Abigail began. My treat, Samuel interrupted, though he had no idea how he would pay. Please. Perhaps it was the sincerity in his voice, or perhaps it was the rain now falling steadily, but Abigail nodded. Children, stay close. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. Samuel, he corrected, leading the way across the rapidly emptying market square. The coffee shop was crowded with others seeking refuge from the sudden storm. Heads turned as Samuel held the door for Abigail and her 5 children. He felt the stares, heard the whispers begin. Isn't that Samuel Blackwood? Mary's husband. Those children aren't his. Who's the woman? Samuel squared his shoulders and approached the counter. The owner, Mrs. Patterson, raised an eyebrow but said nothing as he requested a table. And some milk for the baby, he added, gesturing to the smallest Reed child, who continued to fuss in Abigail's arms. Mrs. Patterson's eyes softened slightly at the sight of the infant. "This way," she said, leading them to a corner table partially hidden by a wooden screen. "I'll bring the milk straight away." Once seated, an awkward silence fell. The three older Reed children, William, and twin girls who looked to be about 8, stared at Samuel with undisguised curiosity. Emma, the one who had approached him in the market, smiled shyly. "Thank you," Abigail said again, bouncing the fussing baby gently. "This is very kind." "It's nothing," Samuel replied, though they both knew it wasn't nothing at all. "How old is your baby?" "Jacob is 10 months, Abigail answered, her face softening as she looked at her youngest. "The twins, Martha and Mary, are 8. Emma is 6, and William is 10. Samuel couldn't help his smile at the coincidence. "My wife was Mary." "Was?" Abigail asked, then immediately looked apologetic. "I'm sorry, that's not my business." "She died 6 months ago," Samuel said simply. "Fever." Abigail nodded, understanding in her eyes. "James, my husband, died of pneumonia 2 months past. We were traveling east looking for work after losing our farm." Mrs. Patterson arrived with a small pitcher of milk and some cups. She placed them on the table, then hesitated. "Will you be ordering anything else, Mr. Blackwood?" Samuel's mind raced. He had given his last coins to Emma. "Just the milk for now, thank you." Mrs. Patterson's lips thinned. "This isn't a charity house, you understand. I can't have people taking up tables without purchasing." Before Samuel could respond, Abigail reached into her worn boot and withdrew a small coin. "A cup of coffee, please, for us to share." Mrs. Patterson took the coin with a sniff and departed. Samuel stared at Abigail, who was carefully pouring milk for baby Jacob. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "One empty hand helping another," she replied, echoing his earlier words. "Besides, I've been saving that penny for an emergency. And this qualifies?" A rare smile touched her lips. "A chance to sit somewhere warm and dry? Absolutely." Samuel found himself smiling back, the first genuine smile he'd felt in months. It surprised him, like finding a forgotten treasure in a dusty corner. Jacob gulped the milk eagerly, his cries subsiding. The older children remained quiet, watching the other customers with wide eyes. Through the window, they could see the rain had become a downpour, turning the dirt streets to mud. "Where are you staying?" Samuel asked, keeping his voice low. Abigail hesitated, her eyes on her children. "We were with my sister in Springfield, but she has 7 of her own. It was too much." She cleared her throat. "We're passing through, looking for work." Samuel understood what she wasn't saying. They had nowhere. The realization settled in his chest like a stone. "And you?" Abigail asked, clearly wanting to change the subject. "Are you from here originally?" "Born and raised," Samuel confirmed. "My family had a furniture shop for 3 generations. Blackwood Fine Furnishings." "Had?" Abigail echoed his earlier question. "The bank owns it now," Samuel admitted. "After Mary got sick, the bills." He trailed off, not wanting to burden this woman with his troubles when she clearly had enough of her own. Mrs. Patterson returned with a single cup of coffee. Abigail thanked her politely, then slid the cup toward Samuel. "Ladies first," he protested. "I insist," she said. "You look like you could use it more than I could." Samuel wanted to argue but found he didn't have the energy. The coffee's warmth seemed to reach places inside him that had been cold for too long. After a few sips, he pushed the cup back toward Abigail. "Your turn," he said. "Fair is fair." As Abigail sipped the coffee, Emma leaned against her mother's side, eyes heavy with sleepiness. The warmth of the shop and the rhythmic sound of rain against the windows were lulling all the children toward drowsiness. "They're exhausted," Samuel observed softly. "It's been a long journey," Abigail agreed. "And sleep doesn't come easy when you're—" She stopped herself, but Samuel understood. "When you're cold, when you're hungry, when you're afraid. There's a rooming house on Cedar Street," he suggested. Mrs. Winslow is fair with her prices. We couldn't impose. It's not an imposition if you pay, Samuel pointed out. And surely in a town this size, there must be work for a capable woman and a strong boy like William. At the mention of his name, William sat up straighter. I can work, he declared. I'm good with animals. And I can read and cipher too. The pride in the boy's voice made something twist in Samuel's chest. He remembered being that age, eager to prove himself to help his family. I've no doubt, Samuel said seriously. A boy who can read and work with animals would be valuable to many businesses here. The door to the coffee shop opened with a gust of wind, admitting Albert Conway, the new owner of Samuel's former shop. Conway shook water from his expensive coat, his eyes scanning the crowded room until they landed on Samuel. His face registered first surprise, then something like contempt as he took in the Reed family. Blackwood, he greeted coolly, approaching their table. Making new friends, I see. Samuel straightened in his chair. Conway. Abigail sensed the tension, gathering baby Jacob closer. Conway's eyes swept over the Reed children with undisguised disgust. Mrs. Patterson usually maintains a certain standard for her establishment. I'm surprised she allowed this. The way he said this made it clear he meant Abigail and her children. Samuel's hands clenched into fists under the table. Mrs. Reed and her family are my guests, he said, his voice level despite the anger building inside him. They're passing through town. The sooner the better, I'd say, Conway remarked with a cold smile. We've enough troubles of our own without taking on strays. William half rose from his seat, his young face flushed with fury, but Abigail placed a restraining hand on his arm. It's all right, William, she said quietly. Mr. Conway is entitled to his opinion. Conway laughed, the sound devoid of humor. At least the boy has spirit. More than can be said for some. His eyes fixed on Samuel. How the mighty have fallen. Blackwood? From shop owner to... What exactly are you now? Before Samuel could respond, Mrs. Patterson arrived at Conway's side. Your usual table is ready, Mr. Conway, she said, shooting an apologetic glance at Samuel. Excellent. Conway straightened his waistcoat. Do keep an eye on your other patrons, Mrs. Patterson. Some of them look like they might steal the silverware. He departed with a smirk, following Mrs. Patterson to a prime table by the fire. Samuel's face burned with humiliation and rage. I apologize for that, he said to Abigail. Albert Conway is a man who measures worth by possessions, Abigail finished for him. I've known many like him. Her quiet dignity in the face of Conway's rudeness made Samuel's anger drain away, replaced by admiration. Here was a woman who had lost everything: home, husband, security. Yet she held her head high and protected her children's pride. Outside, the rain showed no signs of letting up. Through the window, they could see the streets had become small rivers of mud. Emma had fallen asleep against her mother's side, and even William's eyes were growing heavy. We should go, Abigail said, though Samuel could tell she had no idea where they would go. We've imposed enough. Where will you go in this weather? Samuel asked, keeping his voice low. Abigail didn't answer, which was answer enough. Samuel made a decision then, one that would change everything though he couldn't know it yet. I have a room, he said. It's small but dry. Just for tonight, until the storm passes. We couldn't. Please, Samuel interrupted. He struggled to explain the need he felt to help this family, but the words wouldn't come. Finally, he simply said, Please let me do this. Abigail studied his face for a long moment, weighing his sincerity against her children's needs. Just for tonight, she agreed finally. And we'll find a way to repay you. There's nothing to repay. Samuel stood, feeling strangely light despite giving away his last money and now offering his only shelter. Let's go before it gets any worse out there. As they prepared to brave the storm, Samuel caught Conway watching them from his table by the fire, a calculating look in his eyes. Something about that look sent a chill down Samuel's spine that had nothing to do with the weather. What would tomorrow bring? Samuel had no idea. For the first time in months, that uncertainty felt like possibility rather than despair. Mama, is this man our new papa? Emma's innocent question hung in the cramped room like smoke. The rain beat against the single window as 7 souls tried to find space where there was barely enough for one. Samuel froze halfway through hanging his soaked coat on the back of the only chair, while Abigail's cheeks flushed bright red. No, Emma, she answered quickly. Mr. Blackwood is just being kind enough to shelter us from the storm. Remember your manners. William scowled from his position by the door, clearly uncomfortable with their situation and ready to protect his family if needed. The twins, Martha and Mary, huddled together on the floor, whispering and watching Samuel with wide, curious eyes. Baby Jacob had finally fallen asleep against Abigail's shoulder, his tiny face peaceful for the first time since Samuel had met them. Sorry, Mr. Blackwood, Emma said, looking down at her worn shoes. Mama says I ask too many questions. Samuel knelt to her level, finding a smile somewhere inside himself. Questions are how we learn about the world, Emma. Never be sorry for wanting to know things. Her answering smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. The stove barely gave off heat, but it was better than nothing. Samuel added the last of his coal to the dying embers, knowing there was no money to buy more. You'll need the bed, he said to Abigail, not looking at her. The children can sleep there with you. I'll be fine on the floor. We couldn't take your bed, Abigail protested. We've imposed enough. Samuel turned to face her. Please, Mary would. He swallowed hard. Mary would want me to insist. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of shared loss, of dignity maintained despite everything. Abigail nodded once. Thank you. Samuel retrieved Mary's wedding quilt from the trunk, along with the only other blanket he owned. For you, he said, handing the quilt to Abigail. It's warmer than it looks. As Samuel arranged his makeshift bed on the floor, William approached cautiously. My pa taught me to always do something in return when someone helps you, he said, the words formal and practiced. I could clean your boots. They're awful muddy. Samuel glanced at his mud-caked boots. That would be helpful, William. Thank you. The boy nodded solemnly and set to work with a determination that reminded Samuel painfully of himself at that age. While the children settled, Samuel moved to the small table and opened his trunk. From a hidden compartment in the bottom, he pulled out a leather pouch. William noticed, his keen eyes missing nothing. What's that? Samuel hesitated before answering. Something I've been saving. For an emergency. Inside the pouch was a gold pocket watch, his father's. The last valuable thing he owned besides Mary's wedding ring. He'd been unable to part with it, even when selling everything else to pay Mary's medical bills. Tomorrow I'll see about finding you all proper lodging, Samuel said to Abigail. There's a vacant cottage behind the church. Maybe Reverend Phillips. He trailed off as a sharp knock rattled the door. Everyone froze. Blackwood. The landlord's voice boomed through the thin wood. Open up. Samuel gestured for silence, then opened the door just wide enough to step into the hallway, closing it quickly behind him. Mr. Miller, his landlord, stood with arms crossed, face pinched with disapproval. I saw you bring them in, he said without preamble. A woman and children. That wasn't our arrangement. They needed shelter from the storm, Samuel explained. Just for tonight. Miller shook his head. It's not just that. Conway came to see me. He lowered his voice. Says they're beggars. Disease carriers, maybe. Says you're harboring them against town ordinances. Samuel's jaw tightened. They're a respectable family down on their luck. The woman's husband died recently. They're looking for work, not handouts. Doesn't matter to me what they're looking for, Miller replied. What matters is Conway threatened to call the sheriff if I don't handle the situation. And since you're being evicted tomorrow anyway, you're putting us out? Tonight? In this weather? Samuel couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice. Miller at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. Dawn. You have until dawn. Then I want you, and them gone. After Miller left, Samuel stood in the hallway, mind racing. Where could they go? What could he do with no money, no prospects, and 6 people relying on him? When he re-entered the room, 6 pairs of eyes turned to him expectantly. He forced a smile he didn't feel. "Everything's fine," he lied, avoiding Abigail's searching gaze. "Just a misunderstanding." But later, when the children had fallen asleep, the twins and Emma curled on the bed with Abigail and baby Jacob, William on a pallet beside them, Abigail whispered across the darkness. What did he really want? Samuel sighed. No point hiding the truth. We need to leave at dawn, Conway complained. Abigail was silent for so long Samuel thought she might have fallen asleep. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible. There's something I need to tell you, about why we're really here. Samuel raised himself on one elbow, watching her silhouette in the dim light from the banked stove. James, my husband, wasn't just a farmer, Abigail said, the words coming slowly, carefully chosen. He worked for the Pinkerton Detective Agency. His last assignment brought him here to your town. Samuel frowned, confused. Here? Why? He was investigating bank fraud. Someone forging loan documents, taking advantage of farmers and small business owners. She paused. People like you, Samuel. People who lost everything. A cold feeling spread through Samuel's chest. Conway, he breathed. Abigail nodded, though he could barely see it in the darkness. James found evidence, but before he could report it, he got sick. So sick, so quickly. Her voice caught. On his deathbed, he made me promise to finish what he started. To bring the papers to the regional office in St. Louis. Do you have them? The papers? Yes. Her voice dropped even lower. Hidden in Jacob's blanket. Conway must suspect something. He's been following us since Springfield. Samuel's mind spun with the implications. If Conway was guilty of bank fraud, it would explain how he'd acquired so many businesses so quickly, including Samuel's shop. That's why we're here, Abigail continued. I needed to see the man who took your business, to confirm it was the same man James described. Samuel thought of Conway's calculating look in the coffee shop, the speed with which he'd complained to Miller. We need to leave town, he said urgently. Tonight. Where can we go? Abigail asked, and for the first time, Samuel heard real fear in her voice. Samuel's hand closed around the pouch containing his father's watch. I have a plan, he said, but first I need to know something. Do you trust me? In the darkness, Abigail's hand found his. Her fingers were cold but steady. Yes, she said simply. I do. And in that moment, everything changed. Dawn broke gray and miserable over the sleeping town. No one noticed the 6 figures slipping out the back door of Miller's feed store, hurrying toward the livery stable at the edge of town. The streets were empty, shops still closed, only chimney smoke signaling that anyone was awake at this early hour. Samuel led the way, carrying baby Jacob to give Abigail's arms a rest. William walked beside him, shoulders squared with responsibility beyond his years. The twins followed, each holding one of Emma's hands to keep her moving forward. Are we playing a game? Emma whispered. Why must we be so quiet? Yes, a game, Samuel replied, putting a finger to his lips. The quietest ones win. Emma nodded solemnly and pressed her lips together. The livery stable loomed ahead, its wide doors still closed against the morning chill. Samuel's stomach knotted with what he was about to do, but he saw no other choice. Conway would be looking for them, perhaps already had men watching the roads out of town. Wait here, he whispered, handing Jacob back to Abigail. The baby stirred but didn't wake. Samuel approached the stable alone, relief flooding him when he saw a light in the small office window. Hank Porter was already up, as Samuel had hoped. The old man never slept past 5, a habit from decades of caring for horses. Morning, Hank, Samuel called softly as he entered. Hank looked up from his ledger, surprise crossing his weathered face. Samuel? What brings you here at this hour? Samuel pulled out his father's gold watch, placing it deliberately on the desk between them. Hank's eyes widened. Your father's watch? You swore you'd never sell it. Things change, Samuel said simply. I need a wagon and 2 horses. Hank picked up the watch, turning it over in his gnarled hands. This is worth more than that. I'm also buying your silence, Samuel said, lowering his voice. Until noon. Understanding dawned in the old man's eyes. He'd known Samuel since boyhood, had taught him to ride. Running from something? Toward something, Samuel corrected. A chance. Hank studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. Take the covered wagon, and the matched grays. They're steady and strong. He pocketed the watch. I won't miss them till afternoon at the earliest. Thank you. The words felt inadequate for what Hank was risking. Your father was a good man, Hank said. Helped me when no one else would. Consider this repayment. He hesitated, then added, Where will you go? Better you don't know, Samuel replied. Safer that way. 10 minutes later, they were loaded into the wagon. The Reed children wide-eyed with excitement at this unexpected adventure. Samuel helped Abigail up to the seat beside him, noticing the careful way she tucked Jacob's blanket, with its hidden documents, around the sleeping baby. St. Louis? She asked quietly. Samuel shook his head. Not directly. Conway will expect that. We'll head south first, then east. Longer, but safer. As they pulled away from the stable, Samuel couldn't help looking back at the town that had been his home for all his 46 years. The place where he'd been born, married, built a business, lost everything. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, an unknown future. Yet somehow he felt more alive than he had in months. They took the south road, the one less traveled, moving at a steady pace that wouldn't attract attention. The rain had stopped during the night, but the roads were muddy, making progress slow. No one spoke much at first, all of them watching behind for any sign of pursuit. It was Emma who finally broke the tension. I'm hungry, she announced. Blood dripped from Samuel's knuckles onto the rough-hewn floorboards. Outside, the November wind howled through pine trees, covering the sound of William's frightened breathing as the boy pressed himself against the cabin wall. 3 strange men lay sprawled across the small room, one unconscious beside the door, another groaning and clutching his stomach by the fireplace, the third backing away with hands raised in surrender. Please, mister, the third man begged. We didn't know they were with you. We thought they were just some woman and kids squatting in Jake Medford's hunting cabin. Samuel's chest heaved with exertion and rage. For days on the run had worn his body thin, but discovering these men threatening Abigail and the children had awakened something primitive in him, a strength he hadn't known he possessed. Get out, Samuel growled, pointing to the door. Take your friends and get out. If I see any of you within a mile of this place again, I won't stop at broken noses. The surrendering man nodded frantically, already dragging his stomach-clutching companion toward the door. What about Davy? He asked, gesturing to the unconscious man. You've got 2 minutes to wake him and get him moving, Samuel replied, not lowering his fists. Starting now. The minutes that followed were a flurry of activity. Water splashed, curses muttered. The unconscious man half-carried between his companions as they stumbled out into the gathering twilight. Samuel stood in the doorway until they disappeared among the trees, then closed and barred the cabin door with a heavy wooden beam. Only then did he turn to face the others. The cabin, barely more than a hunter's shelter, consisted of one room with a stone fireplace, a rough table with 2 benches, and a platform loft accessed by a ladder in the corner. The Reed family was huddled at the back of the room, William still against the wall, the twins hiding behind their mother, Emma's face buried in Abigail's skirts. Baby Jacob, mercifully, was asleep in a makeshift cradle fashioned from a wooden crate. Are they gone? William asked, his voice higher than usual, betraying his fear despite his obvious effort to seem brave. Samuel nodded, suddenly aware of the throbbing pain in his right hand. They won't be back. Abigail moved forward with quick, purposeful steps. Without speaking, she guided Samuel to sit at the table, then poured water from their precious jug into a basin. Gently, she took his injured hand and began cleaning the blood away. "You shouldn't have fought them," she said quietly. "There were 3 of them. What should I have done?" Samuel winced as she pressed a cloth against his split knuckles. "Let them throw you all out into the cold? Or worse, you could have been killed." The simple truth in her words hung between them. If he had been killed, what would have happened to Abigail and the children? To the evidence against Conway? The children watched wide-eyed as Abigail wrapped Samuel's hand with a strip torn from one of their few clean rags. Her fingers were gentle but firm, moving with the practiced efficiency of a woman accustomed to tending injuries. "How did you know?" she asked. "That we were in trouble?" Samuel glanced at the window, remembering the bone-deep certainty that had struck him as he'd returned from hunting with the 2 rabbits now hanging forgotten by the door. "I heard William shout." From his place against the wall, William straightened. "I tried to stop them like Pa would've. They pushed in anyway." "You did exactly right," Samuel told him. "You warned your mother, gave her time to grab Jacob and get the girls behind her." Pride flickered across the boy's face, chasing away some of the fear. "Those men," Abigail said, keeping her voice low. "Do you think Conway sent them?" Samuel considered the possibility. "No. They seemed surprised when I mentioned the cabin belonged to Jake Medford. I think they were just drifters looking for shelter." He didn't add that drifters could be hired, paid to report sightings. Better not to worry her more than necessary. The cabin had been a lucky find. 3 days of rough travel had taken them far from town, their progress slowed by muddy roads and the need to avoid main thoroughfares. Food had run low, the November chill had seeped into their bones, and the children's initial excitement had given way to exhaustion and complaints. Then, as if in answer to an unspoken prayer, they'd spotted the cabin nestled among pine trees, small but solid, with a stone chimney promising warmth. A faded sign nailed to a nearby tree had declared, "Private property, J. Medford." But the layers of dust inside suggested no one had visited in months. "We should move on," Abigail said, finishing with his bandage. "If those men found this place, others might too." Samuel shook his head. "Not tonight. It's getting dark, and there's a storm coming. We'll leave at first light." As if to emphasize his point, rain began to patter against the cabin roof, quickly building to a steady downpour. The wind moaned through the trees outside, finding every crack and gap in the cabin walls. "I'm cold," Emma announced, wrapping thin arms around herself. Samuel rose from the table. "Let's get a fire going." "William, want to help me?" The boy nodded eagerly, seeming to grow taller with the responsibility. Together they rebuilt the fire the intruders had started, adding logs from the small pile in the corner until flames danced cheerfully in the stone hearth. The warmth slowly spread through the cabin, bringing color back to pinched faces. Abigail set about preparing their meager dinner, the last of their bread, shared between them with promises of rabbit stew in the morning. As full darkness fell outside, Samuel climbed the ladder to inspect the loft. A musty bearskin lay spread across rough planking, not ideal but warmer than the floor below. "The children can sleep up here," he called down. "It's small, but they'll fit." Later, after the children had been settled in the loft, Samuel and Abigail sat before the fire. Jacob, having nursed and fallen back asleep, lay bundled in his blanket, important documents still hidden within its folds, on a bed of pine boughs Abigail had arranged near the hearth. For a long while neither spoke. The crackling of the fire and the drumming of rain on the roof filled the silence. Samuel found himself studying Abigail's profile in the firelight, the determined set of her jaw, the weariness around her eyes, the way she absently twisted her wedding ring with her thumb. "We should reach Jefferson City in 3 days, he said finally. "Maybe 4 with the rain. From there, we can take the train to St. Louis." Abigail nodded, still staring into the flames. "And then, you'll deliver the evidence. Conway will face justice." "I meant after that." She turned to look at him directly. "What happens to you after that?" The question caught Samuel off guard. He hadn't thought beyond getting Abigail and the children safely to St. Louis, beyond seeing Conway punished for his crimes. What would he do after? Return to a town where he had nothing? Start over somewhere new? Alone? Before he could answer, a sound from above drew their attention. A soft cry, quickly muffled. "It's Mary," Abigail said, rising. "She has nightmares sometimes." Samuel watched as she climbed the ladder to comfort her daughter. Voices murmured in the darkness of the loft, too low to make out the words, but the tone was soothing, reassuring. A mother's voice, chasing away monsters. When Abigail returned, her face was troubled. "She dreamed her father was calling for her," she explained quietly. "It happens often. The twins were closest to James. They feel his loss the most deeply." "And you?" Samuel asked. "How do you bear it?" The question slipped out before he could stop it. Too personal, too intimate for their tenuous relationship. But Abigail didn't seem offended. "One breath at a time," she answered. "One step, one day. I don't have the luxury of falling apart." She paused, studying him. "How do you bear Mary's loss?" "Poorly," Samuel admitted. "Until recently, I wasn't sure I wanted to continue bearing it." Understanding passed between them, an acknowledgement of shared pain, of the crushing weight of grief that only those who have carried it can recognize. "When James died," Abigail said slowly, "I was angry, not just sad, furious. At God, at the doctors who couldn't save him, at James himself for leaving me with 5 children and no home." She drew a shaky breath. "Some days I'm still angry, but then William will say something just like his father would, or Jacob will smile, and I remember that parts of James live on. That helps, somehow." Samuel thought of Mary's preserves, of her quilt. Small pieces of her, preserved. "It does help," he agreed, "though sometimes it hurts just as much." They fell silent again, each lost in memories. Outside, the storm intensified, wind driving rain against the windows. A leak developed in one corner of the roof, water dripping steadily into a pot. Abigail positioned to catch it. "We should try to sleep," Samuel said finally. "Tomorrow will be difficult, with the mud." Abigail nodded but made no move to rise. "Samuel," she began hesitantly, "I need to ask, why are you doing this? Why risk everything for people you barely know?" It was the question he'd been asking himself for days. Why had he given his last coins to Emma? Why had he invited them to his room? Why was he now fleeing across the state with them, pursued by a man who wouldn't hesitate to destroy them all? "When Mary died," he said slowly, "something in me died too. Not just love or happiness. Purpose. I had no reason to keep going." He stared into the fire, searching for words. "Then Emma asked for help, and for the first time in months I felt necessary, as if what I did mattered." "It matters," Abigail said softly. "You've saved us, more than once." Samuel shook his head. "No, you've saved me." A log shifted in the fireplace, sending sparks up the chimney. In the sudden flare of light, Samuel saw tears glistening in Abigail's eyes, though none fell. "We should sleep," she repeated, rising from her place by the fire. "I'll take the first watch." "There's no need. Those men might come back with friends," she interrupted. "Or it might be Conway's men next time. We need to be cautious." Samuel couldn't argue with her logic. "Wake me in 4 hours, then. I'll take the second watch." As Abigail settled in a chair position to see both the door and the windows, Samuel stretched out on the floor near the fire, using his coat as a pillow. Despite the hard surface beneath him and the worries circling in his mind, exhaustion soon pulled him towards sleep. Just before consciousness slipped away, he felt something being laid gently over him. Mary's wedding quilt, with its patches of memory and love. The scent of Abigail lingered on the fabric, mingling with Mary's, past and present overlapping in his dreams. In the deepest part of the night, a new sound joined the storm. Hoofbeats on the forest path, moving steadily closer to the little cabin and its sleeping inhabitants. "Get up! Now!" Abigail's urgent whisper and rough shake jolted Samuel from deep sleep. The cabin was dark. The fire burned down to embers that cast more shadows than light. Rain still drummed on the roof, but beneath it, another sound, men's voices, the creak of saddles, horses snorting in the cold. "How many?" Samuel asked, instantly alert as he scrambled to his feet. "4, maybe 5, Abigail replied, already moving toward the ladder. "They're coming up the path." Samuel grabbed her arm, stopping her. "There's no time to run. Get the children into the root cellar." "What root cellar?" "Under the table there's a trapdoor. I found it when hunting for more firewood." He was already dragging the heavy table aside, revealing the outline of a square door set into the floorboards. "It's small, but you'll all fit if you stay quiet." Lantern light flickered through the windows as the riders drew closer. Samuel could hear the jingle of bridles, the low murmur of men discussing their approach. "What about you?" Abigail demanded, even as she knelt to lift the trapdoor. Musty air wafted up from the darkness below. "I'll deal with them," Samuel said grimly. "Quickly now, get the children." While Abigail hurried to wake the older children and bring them down from the loft, Samuel gathered their belongings, working fast to erase evidence of the family's presence. He had just enough time to stuff their packs into the cellar and help Emma down the crude ladder when a heavy knock rattled the cabin door. "Open up in there." Samuel froze, recognizing the voice instantly. "Albert Conway." "Go," he whispered urgently to Abigail, who stood holding Jacob to her chest, the baby mercifully still asleep. "Stay absolutely silent, no matter what you hear. Don't come out until I tell you it's safe." "Samuel, remember what's at stake," he cut her off. "Those documents must reach St. Louis." Something passed between them, fear, determination, something else without a name. Then Abigail pressed Mary's wedding ring into Samuel's palm. "For luck," she whispered, then descended into the darkness, pulling the trapdoor closed after her. Samuel quickly shoved the table back into place, then took a moment to compose himself. He mussed his hair, rumpled his clothes to look as if he'd been sleeping alone, then grabbed a rifle that hung over the fireplace. Unloaded, he knew, but Conway wouldn't. The pounding came again, harder. "Final warning. Open this door or we'll break it down." Taking a deep breath, Samuel unbarred the door and pulled it open, feigning sleepy confusion that quickly transformed into appropriate shock. "Conway?" he said, gripping the rifle loosely but visibly. "What in God's name are you doing here?" Albert Conway stood on the threshold, rain dripping from his expensive coat, his round face flushed with cold and exertion. Behind him, 3 men sat on horseback, their own faces hard in the lantern light. "Blackwood," Conway said, surprise momentarily replacing his usual smugness. "I wasn't expecting to find you here, though I suppose I should have guessed. Where else would that woman and her brats go?" Samuel leaned against the doorframe, deliberately casual. "What woman? I've been alone since I left town." Conway's eyes narrowed. "Don't play games with me. The Pinkertons' widow. My sources say she was seen traveling with a man fitting your description." His gaze swept past Samuel into the cabin's interior. "Where are they?" "I have no idea what you're talking about," Samuel replied evenly. "I left town because there was nothing left for me there. Came to this old hunting cabin I remembered from my youth." He patted the rifle. "Been living off the land, trying to figure out my next move." One of the mounted men shifted impatiently. "He's lying, Mr. Conway. Those drifters said there was a woman and children here just hours ago." Conway smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Indeed, and I don't think they walked away in this weather." He stepped forward, forcing Samuel to give ground or risk a confrontation too soon. "Let's have a look around, shall we?" "I'd rather you didn't," Samuel said, raising the rifle slightly. "This is private property." "Not yours, though," Conway countered. "This is Jake Medford's hunting cabin, and Jake happens to owe the bank, my bank, a considerable sum. So technically, I have every right to inspect what might soon be repossessed." He snapped his fingers, and 2 of the mounted men dismounted, hands hovering near their holsters. Samuel knew he was outmatched. An unloaded rifle against multiple armed men wasn't a fight he could win. His only hope was to somehow get Conway and his men away from the cabin long enough for Abigail and the children to escape. "Fine," he said, stepping aside. "Look all you want. There's nothing to find." Conway entered, followed by his men. They moved around the small cabin, checking the corners, looking up at the loft. Samuel held his breath when one man approached the table, but the trapdoor was well hidden beneath the heavy piece of furniture. "See," Samuel said. "Just me. Now if you've satisfied your curiosity, I'd appreciate it if you'd leave. Some of us need to sleep." Conway ignored him, walking slowly around the cabin's perimeter. "I've been wondering, Blackwood, why you left town so suddenly, and with such interesting companions." He ran a finger along a shelf, inspecting the dust. "But then I remembered, you were on the board of the bank before your unfortunate financial troubles. You would have had access to loan records, correspondence." Samuel kept his expression neutral, though inwardly he cursed. Conway was fishing, but dangerously close to the truth. "I haven't set foot in that bank since they foreclosed on my shop," he said. "And I still don't know what woman you're talking about." Conway stopped his circuit of the room directly in front of Samuel. Despite being shorter by several inches, he managed to look down his nose with contempt. "James Reed," Conway said softly. "Does that name mean anything to you?" Samuel frowned, feigning confusion. "Should it?" James Reed was a Pinkerton detective who came to our town earlier this year, asking questions about the bank. Unfortunate that he died so suddenly of pneumonia. Conway's smile was reptilian. More unfortunate that his widow seems to think she should continue his work. "Sounds like a problem for you," Samuel said carelessly. "Nothing to do with me," one of the men called from the loft. "Nothing up here, Mr. Conway. Just dust." Conway's eyes never left Samuel's face. "Check outside. The stable, the outhouse. They can't have gone far in this weather." As two men clomped back out into the rain, Conway moved to warm his hands by the embers of the fire. "You know, Blackwood, I always thought you were cleverer than this. Throwing away your life for strangers." He shook his head. "What would Mary think?" The mention of Mary's name in Conway's mouth sent a surge of rage through Samuel. He tightened his grip on the rifle, knuckles whitening. "Don't speak her name," he said, voice low and dangerous. Conway smiled, knowing he'd struck a nerve. Such loyalty, even beyond the grave. Touching. He moved to the table, idly running his hand along its surface. "Is that why you're helping the Reed woman? Transferred affection? Or is it something more practical?" His eyebrows raised suggestively. "A widow with 5 children is a heavy burden, but desperate women are often accommodating." Samuel felt his control slipping, exactly as Conway intended. The man was baiting him, trying to provoke a reaction that would reveal the truth. He forced himself to breathe slowly, to remember that hidden beneath the floorboards, Abigail and the children might hear every word. "I think you should leave now," Samuel said, each word clipped and precise. "Not until I find what I came for," Conway replied. He leaned against the table, his weight making the old wood creak. "You see, James Reed collected certain documents, fabrications, really suggesting improprieties at my bank. These lies could damage my reputation if they reached the wrong hands." He examined his manicured nails. "I can't allow that." Outside, the men's voices rose in frustration as their search yielded nothing. The rain had intensified again, drumming hard against the roof and windows. Samuel calculated distances, options, potential weapons beyond the useless rifle. "I'm getting impatient, Blackwood," Conway said, straightening. "Where is the woman?" "Gone," Samuel answered truthfully. "Left town days ago. St. Louis, I think she said." Something flickered in Conway's eyes, uncertainty, perhaps. "She was seen with you." "Maybe so. We traveled together briefly, safety in numbers. But we parted ways yesterday." Samuel shrugged. "She had her destination, I had mine." Before Conway could respond, the cabin door burst open and one of his men rushed in, soaked and breathless. Riders coming fast from the north, Mr. Conway. At least 6 of them. Conway frowned. Who would be out in this weather? Don't know, but they're wearing badges. The color drained from Conway's face. He stared at Samuel with sudden understanding. You sent word ahead. Samuel allowed himself a smile. Turns out I'm cleverer than you thought. It was a bluff. Samuel had sent no messages, had no idea who might be approaching. But Conway's reaction told him everything he needed to know. The banker was afraid of legal authorities finding him here, away from his town and his web of influence. We need to go, Conway snapped to his men. Now. What about him? One man asked, gesturing to Samuel. Conway hesitated, eyes calculating. For a moment, Samuel thought the banker might order him killed on the spot. But the sound of approaching horses seemed to decide him. Leave him. He's not worth the trouble. Conway pointed a finger at Samuel. This isn't over, Blackwood. Not by a long shot. Then they were gone, hurrying into the rain, mounting up and galloping away from the approaching riders. Samuel stood in the doorway, hardly daring to believe their luck. Who were these mysterious saviors? As the sound of Conway's party faded into the distance, the new riders came into view, and Samuel's heart sank. Not lawmen at all, but a group of loggers, their axes and saws visible as they approached. They barely glanced at the cabin as they passed, likely heading for a lumber camp further north. Samuel waited until they too had disappeared into the rainy darkness. Then, hands shaking with delayed reaction, he closed and barred the door. Abigail, he called softly, hurrying to move the table. It's safe now. They're gone. He lifted the trapdoor to find 5 pairs of eyes staring up at him from the darkness. Abigail clutched Jacob to her chest. The older children huddled around her in the cramped space. Conway, she whispered. Gone, Samuel confirmed, reaching down to help them up one by one. Thought some lawmen were coming. Pure luck. As the children emerged, stiff and cold from their confinement but mercifully unharmed, Abigail lingered below. I heard what he said, she told Samuel quietly. About me. About you. Samuel felt heat rise in his face. Conway is a snake. Nothing he says matters. It matters if it's what people will think. Her eyes, tired but determined, met his. If we succeed, when we succeed, there will be talk. About us. About why you helped me. Let them talk, Samuel said simply, extending his hand to her. We know the truth. Abigail looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment. Then, decision made, she grasped it firmly and allowed him to pull her up into the firelight. The truth, she repeated softly. Yes. But as dawn broke over the little cabin in the woods, Samuel wondered what that truth really was. Had he helped Abigail and her children solely to see justice done? Or was there more to it? A connection he hadn't dared acknowledge, possibilities he hadn't allowed himself to consider? As he watched Abigail comforting Emma, who'd been frightened by their close call, Samuel felt something stir in his chest. Not love, it was too soon for that, but perhaps the beginning of something just as powerful. Hope. With careful fingers, he placed Mary's ring back in Abigail's palm. Keep it, he said. We might still need that luck. Their journey was far from over. Conway was still a threat, and St. Louis was days away. But for the first time since Mary's death, Samuel Blackwood looked forward to tomorrow. Around his neck, on a leather cord hidden beneath his shirt, hung his own wedding ring. No longer a weight of obligation, but a reminder of a love that had taught him how to live, how to give, and perhaps, how to love again. The St. Louis Pinkerton office buzzed with activity, men in suits moving with purpose through narrow hallways. Abigail Reed sat rigid in a wooden chair, hands folded tightly in her lap, while across the desk, a silver-haired man examined James Reed's documents through wire-rimmed spectacles. Outside the frost-covered window, smokestacks puffed gray clouds into the winter sky. Mrs. Reed, the man finally said, setting the papers down with careful precision. Your husband's work is exceptional. Conway's fraud is laid out clearly: falsified loan documents, illegal foreclosures, bribery of bank inspectors. He removed his spectacles, rubbing the bridge of his nose. However, I must ask, why didn't you bring these to us immediately after James' death? Abigail's throat tightened. 2 weeks of hard travel, constant fear, children falling ill with colds, all to reach this moment. My husband died suddenly, Mr. Harrison. I had 5 children to care for, no money, and nowhere to go. Finding justice seemed less important than keeping my family alive. From his position by the door, Samuel watched Abigail's shoulders square against the implied criticism. He'd insisted on accompanying her to this meeting while William watched over his siblings at the modest boarding house where they'd found rooms. 3 days in St. Louis had allowed them all to rest, to eat properly, to wash away the dirt of their journey, but the future remained uncertain. And what changed your mind? Harrison continued, tapping the documents. Abigail's eyes briefly met Samuel's before returning to the Pinkerton agent. I realized James didn't die of natural causes. Harrison's eyebrows shot up. You believe he was murdered? The fever came on too suddenly, progressed too quickly? Abigail explained, her voice steady despite the awful words. The local doctor seemed nervous, uncomfortable. He refused to look me in the eye when he pronounced James dead. That's merely suspicion, Harrison pointed out, not evidence. My husband was healthy one day and burning with fever the next, the morning after he told me he'd gathered enough evidence against Conway. Abigail countered. Evidence that could send the man to prison. James had planned to travel to your office that very week. Harrison frowned, considering. Poisoning would explain it. It would indeed, said a new voice from the doorway. They all turned to see a tall, lean man leaning against the doorframe. His clothes were plain but well kept, his eyes sharp beneath the brim of his hat. Daniels, Harrison said by way of greeting. This is James Reed's widow. The newcomer, Daniels, nodded to Abigail, then handed Harrison a telegram. This arrived from Sheriff Taylor in Jefferson City. They arrested one of Conway's men trying to bribe a train conductor for information about our friends here. He gestured toward Abigail and Samuel. Harrison scanned the telegram, his expression hardening. The man confessed that Conway ordered James Reed's medicine tampered with. He looked up at Abigail, genuine regret in his eyes. I'm sorry, Mrs. Reed. You were right. Samuel moved to stand behind Abigail's chair, close enough that she could feel his presence but not so close as to appear improper. Her back was ramrod straight, her face a careful mask, but he could see the slight trembling of her hands. What happens now? Samuel asked. Harrison and Daniels exchanged glances. We'll dispatch agents to arrest Conway immediately, Harrison said. These documents, combined with the confession, should ensure he spends the rest of his life in prison. And restitution? Samuel pressed. Conway's victims deserve compensation, including Mrs. Reed, whose husband he murdered, and the business owners he defrauded, including me, he didn't add. The courts will determine that, Harrison replied cautiously. Daniels leaned forward. However, the Pinkerton agency takes care of its own. James Reed died in service. He slid an envelope across the desk to Abigail. This is an advance on his pension. It should help you establish a new home. Abigail stared at the envelope but didn't touch it. And what about Mr. Blackwood? She asked quietly. Without his help, these documents would never have reached you. Harrison studied Samuel with new interest. Yes, we've heard about your assistance, Mr. Blackwood. Most commendable. I did what anyone would do, Samuel said uncomfortably. No, Daniels contradicted. Most would have looked the other way, especially someone with nothing to gain and everything to lose. Harrison tapped his desk thoughtfully. The agency could use a man like you, Blackwood. Someone who understands furniture and business, who can spot forgeries, who knows how to blend in. We have positions available. The offer caught Samuel by surprise. Him? A Pinkerton detective? The notion seemed absurd until he thought about it. He had always been good with details, with reading people. And what else did he have to return to? His eyes met Abigail's. Her expression was unreadable, but something passed between them, an unspoken question. "I appreciate the offer," Samuel said carefully, "but I need to think about it." Harrison nodded. "Of course. Meanwhile, you'll both need to remain in St. Louis until we apprehend Conway. Your testimonies will be crucial." Outside the Pinkerton office, snow had begun to fall, dusting the streets with white. Abigail walked beside Samuel in silence, the envelope clutched in her gloved hand, her thoughts clearly miles away. "Are you all right?" Samuel finally asked as they turned toward the boarding house. "He had James killed," she said, her voice barely audible. "I suspected, but hearing it confirmed." Samuel yearned to comfort her, but maintained a proper distance as they walked along the busy street. "Conway will face justice now." "Yes." She stopped suddenly, turning to face him. "Will you take the position?" The directness of her question startled him. "I don't know. It's a chance for a new beginning. But what?" How could he explain? The Pinkerton offer meant a future, purpose, stability, everything he'd been missing. But accepting would mean traveling constantly, leaving behind. What exactly? What did he have to leave? The answer came unbidden, them. Leaving Abigail and the children. "It would mean going wherever they send me," he said finally. Understanding flickered in Abigail's eyes. "Of course." They resumed walking, the silence between them now heavy with unspoken words. At the boarding house, they found chaos. Emma ran to greet them in the hallway, her face tear-streaked. "Mama! William's fighting!" Samuel and Abigail rushed to their rooms to find William pinning another boy against the wall, fists clenched white with fury. The twins were crying in the corner while Jacob wailed in his makeshift crib. "William!" Abigail's voice cracked like a whip. "Release him this instant!" The boy complied reluctantly, though his glare remained fixed on the other child, a red-headed youth about his age who now nursed a bloody nose. "He called us beggars." William spat. "Said we don't belong here." The red-headed boy backed away. "My pa says decent folk don't run from town to town." Samuel stepped forward, placing himself between the boys. "That's enough," he said firmly. "Go back to your room, young man." With a final glare, the boy slunk away. Samuel then turned to William, whose anger was already dissolving into shame beneath his mother's disapproving gaze. "I had to defend our family name," William insisted, though with less conviction. "Pa would have." Samuel exchanged glances with Abigail, silently asking permission before speaking. At her slight nod, he placed a hand on William's shoulder. "Your father was a brave man who stood up for what was right," Samuel said carefully. "But he used his mind more than his fists. That's why he became a detective, to fight wrongdoing with intelligence, not violence." William's defiance crumbled entirely. "Are they going to catch the man who killed Pa?" "Yes," Abigail answered, gathering the twins close as their tears subsided. "The Pinkertons are arresting him now." "Good," William said fiercely. "I hope they hang him." Samuel and Abigail shared another look, one of concern. The boy's anger was understandable but worrying in its intensity. Later, after the children had been calmed and fed, Samuel and Abigail stood in the hallway between their separate rooms. The boarding house had grown quiet, most residents already asleep. "I'm worried about William," Abigail confessed. "All this anger, it's not like him." "He's grieving," Samuel said, "and he's trying to be the man of the family. He's 10 years old. He shouldn't have to be a man yet." "No, he shouldn't," Samuel agreed. He hesitated, then added, "Abigail, about the Pinkerton offer." She cut him off gently. "You should accept it. It's a good opportunity." "That's not." "We'll be fine," she continued, not meeting his eyes. "With James' pension, I can find a place for us. Perhaps back in Springfield, near my sister." "Is that what you want?" Samuel asked, trying to read her expression in the dim hallway light. Abigail's smile didn't reach her eyes. "What I want doesn't matter. What matters is doing what's best for my children." "And what would that be?" Her fingers twisted her wedding ring, a nervous habit Samuel had noticed before. stability, safety, a proper home. All things I want for them too, Samuel said quietly. They stood in silence, the air between them thick with words unsaid. Finally, Abigail sighed. It's late. We should sleep. Samuel nodded, but as she turned to go, he spoke again. Abigail, we need to talk about what happens after Conway is arrested. About the future. She paused, her back to him. Yes, she agreed, her voice barely audible. Tomorrow. But as Samuel lay awake that night, staring at the cracked ceiling of his rented room, he wondered if there was any future that could possibly work. They were two broken people with different paths ahead. The Pinkerton offer pulled him one way. Abigail and her children turned his heart in another direction entirely. By morning, he would need to decide. And so would she. Pink lights spilled across the train station platform, painting the fresh snow with rosy hues. Steam billowed from the waiting locomotive, mingling with the breath of passengers huddled against the January cold. Among them stood Samuel Blackwood, a battered suitcase at his feet, hat pulled low against the frigid wind. You don't have to leave today, Harrison said, checking his pocket watch for the third time in 5 minutes. Conway's trial doesn't begin for another week. Samuel shook his head. Better this way. My testimony is recorded. There's nothing more I can do here, except say goodbye properly, Harrison observed, glancing meaningfully down the platform. Following his gaze, Samuel saw them, Abigail and the children, hurrying through the morning crowd. His heart stumbled in his chest even as his face remained carefully neutral. You told them, he said, not bothering to hide his annoyance. Harrison shrugged unapologetically. Mrs. Reed asked where you'd gone. I couldn't lie to a detective's widow. Before Samuel could respond, Emma broke free from her mother's grasp and raced toward him, oblivious to proper station decorum. Mr. Blackwood, she cried, skidding to a stop before him. You can't go. You promised to teach me checkers. Samuel knelt to her level, his practiced words of farewell dissolving at the distress in her small face. I did promise that, didn't I? You promised lots of things, William added, arriving with the rest of his family. The boy's expression was guarded, betrayal and understanding warring in his eyes. All aboard, called the conductor. Eastbound train departing in 5 minutes. Harrison cleared his throat. I'll leave you to your goodbyes. With a tip of his hat to Abigail, he retreated to a discreet distance. Samuel stood, facing the family that had somehow become so important to him in such a short time. The twins clung to their mother's skirts, watching him with solemn eyes. Baby Jacob, bundled against the cold, slept peacefully in Abigail's arms. Why didn't you tell us you were leaving? Abigail asked quietly. She wore a new bonnet purchased with the first of James' pension money, but her eyes held the same mixture of strength and vulnerability that had drawn Samuel to her from the beginning. I left a letter, he answered lamely. A letter. Abigail's voice was flat. After everything we've been through together. Samuel glanced at the waiting train, then back at the family before him. How could he explain? That he'd spent the night wrestling with impossible choices? That watching Abigail and her children settle into their new life, with their Pinkerton pension and their plans to return to Springfield, had convinced him he had no place in their future? The Chicago office needed immediate help with a forgery case, he said instead. Harrison recommended me. So you've accepted the position, Abigail noted. Yes. William stepped forward suddenly. Will you catch bad men like the one who killed my pa? Samuel met the boy's intense gaze. I'll try, William. Good. William thrust out his hand formally. Then I guess it's all right that you're going. Samuel shook the offered hand, his throat tight with emotion he dared not show. Take care of your mother and the little ones. I will. The boy straightened his shoulders. I'm the man of the family now. William Reed, Abigail scolded gently. You are a boy who needs to enjoy being a boy. We've discussed this. Samuel hid a smile at the exchange. In the 2 weeks since reaching St. Louis, he'd watched Abigail blossom from a desperate, exhausted refugee into a confident woman with plans for her family's future. The shadows of grief still lingered in her eyes, but a new determination had taken root. "Final call for eastbound passengers," the conductor shouted. "You should go," Abigail said, her voice carefully neutral. Samuel nodded, picking up his suitcase. But as he turned toward the train, Emma flung her arms around his legs. "Please don't leave, Mr. Blackwood," she begged, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Who will make us laugh? Who will carry Jacob when he gets fussy? Who will help Mama when she looks sad?" "Emma," Abigail chided, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "That's enough." But the child's words had frozen Samuel in place. Who indeed? The question echoed in his mind, forcing him to confront the truth he'd been avoiding. Over the past weeks, as they'd waited for Conway's arrest and the subsequent legal proceedings, Samuel had found himself becoming increasingly entangled in the Reed family's daily life. He'd helped William with his sums, told bedtime stories to the twins, rocked Jacob to sleep when Abigail was exhausted. Small domestic moments that had begun to heal something broken inside him. And then there was Abigail herself. Their conversations in the evenings, after the children were asleep. The way her rare laugh transformed her face. The quiet strength she showed, day after day. The growing awareness between them that neither dared acknowledge. "Sir," the conductor approached, impatient. "Are you boarding or not?" Samuel looked at the train, then back at the family watching him with varying expressions of sadness and resignation. The Pinkerton position offered purpose, a chance to use his skills to rebuild his life. Chicago awaited, with its busy streets and anonymous crowds where no one knew his failures. But Springfield offered something else entirely. "No," Samuel heard himself say. "I'm not boarding." The conductor shrugged. "Suit yourself." He turned away, signaling to the engineer. Samuel set his suitcase down as the train began to pull away from the station. The look of confusion on Abigail's face mirrored his own internal state. "I don't understand," she said. "The position in Chicago isn't what I want," Samuel finished for her. Hope flickered briefly in her eyes before caution reasserted itself. "What do you want, Samuel?" The question hung between them, laden with possibilities and pitfalls. Emma had stopped crying and now watched the adults with unabashed curiosity. Even the twins sensed something important happening. Their small faces turned up attentively. Samuel took a deep breath. "I want to go to Springfield." "Springfield," Abigail repeated, confusion evident. "But there's no Pinkerton office there." "Exactly." Samuel removed his hat, a gesture of sincerity. "Abigail, these past weeks, working with the Pinkertons, I've realized something. I don't want to spend my life chasing criminals across the country. I want to build something lasting." Understanding dawned slowly in her eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'd like to come to Springfield, open a furniture shop, a proper one, not just repairs. Use the skills my father taught me." He hesitated, then added softly, "If you and the children would welcome a neighbor." "A neighbor?" Abigail repeated, something unreadable in her expression. "For now," Samuel clarified. Until we both know if there might be more." The station had grown quiet, the morning train now just a smudge of smoke in the distance. Snow began to fall again, delicate flakes landing on Abigail's bonnet and catching in her eyelashes. "Samuel," she began, then stopped, seeming to gather her thoughts. "We barely know each other." "I know," he acknowledged, "and I know it's too soon for either of us. You're still grieving James, and Mary," she finished for him. He nodded. "But I also know that when I imagine my future now, I can't picture it without you and the children in it. I'm not asking for promises, Abigail. Just possibility." Emma tugged at her mother's coat. "Can Mr. Blackwood come with us, Mama? Please." William watched the exchange with serious eyes, neither encouraging nor objecting. The twins whispered to each other, their earlier solemnity replaced by barely contained excitement. Abigail looked down at her children, then back at Samuel. "Springfield is a growing town," she said slowly. "They could use a good furniture maker." Hope rose in Samuel's chest. Is that a yes? It's a maybe, Abigail answered, but her lips curved in a smile that reached her eyes for the first time since he'd known her. A possibility, as you put it. I can work with possibility, Samuel said, returning her smile. Later that afternoon, as Harrison helped Samuel draft a polite refusal to the Chicago office, the Pinkerton agent shook his head in bemusement. You're choosing quite the different path, Blackwood. A ready-made family isn't an easy undertaking. Nothing worth doing is easy, Samuel replied, thinking of his father's words from long ago. Besides, we're just neighbors for now. The future will reveal itself in time. Harrison signed the letter with a flourish. Well, I hope it works out for you all. As Samuel left the Pinkerton office for the last time, snowflakes dancing in the twilight, he spotted Abigail waiting across the street, Jacob bundled in her arms. She raised a hand in greeting, and he returned the gesture, a quiet understanding passing between them. They would take this journey one step at a time, two people who had lost everything now finding, in each other, the courage to begin again. Not a fairy tale ending, but something better, a true beginning, rooted in shared grief and growing hope. Samuel thought of Mary's wedding quilt, now carefully packed among Abigail's belongings for the journey to Springfield. How appropriate that this new chapter would be wrapped in those patches of memory, carrying the past forward into an unexpected future. The worth of empty hands, he had learned, wasn't in what they could hold, but in what they could offer, and sometimes, when least expected, in what they could receive.